the Americans are really baffled about why is it so difficult to solve these problems, political problems in the Eurozone.
Certainly, it's easier if it's one country addressing its problems. And then if you look at it from a European perspective, there's a great deal of history, and then the politics are mixing with the economics as well as the values. And then, as you alluded to at the very beginning, there's an incredible timing challenge in that the markets would like a solution now. And if you were to go about it in a orderly political process, it would take a great deal of time. So there's got to be a compromise,
Sure.
agreed.
Dr. Abedian, I guess it goes to the heart of the matter here, because some people are saying what is most difficult about trying to solve this problem is really that the European Union money union, or however you want to phrase it, is really a combination of economies that are not equal in the first place. They've been lumped together. They're very different. The balance in their budgets broken up, creating instability, investors losing confidence in the value of some of these countries' debt.
I think there are three layers of complexity. One is just what you mentioned, that you have single currency, but you have no common or technically convergent fiscal rules about what is the level of welfare that is on, what's the working age, what's the retirement age, etc., etc. So you have a fiscal problem which is absolutely deep and wide. You also have a cultural issue. The culture of work, for example, in Greece and Italy is very different from the culture of work and expectations in Germany. And to some extent, there is a Southern Europe problem as opposed to Northern Europe problem. And the third issue, which has complicated these things quite manifestly over the past 3 years, over and above the fiscal complexities and bankruptcies, you have leadership bankruptcy, that there isn't a credible leader or a set of leaders who can pull and articulate and have the backing of their citizens. So that combination is a very lethal cocktail for solving any problem.
Let's pick up on the issue of leadership then and ask Chris whether he thinks that on the back of that bankruptcy on where leadership is concerned, do you regard the summit that gets underway today as any cruncher than the previous ones?
I have a funny feeling that this particular summit is not going to actually satisfy the demands of what's required in the markets. The leadership, in a sense, is over a clash of what I call philosophy. You've got the American approach and British approach, which is more print money, lower interest rates, blow your budget, effectively deficit spending as a solution, whereas the German approach, and they're imposing that on Europe, is to actually, look at fiscal austerity. You don't print money because they've had a history of hyperinflation, and they certainly don't want to go there again. And that's part of the criticism and bazooka that people are looking for, is to see a massive amount of printing and that sort of thing. And in a sense, I actually have a slightly different take, in the sense that I think because of the difference of philosophical approaches, the American one is more to actually just kick the can down the road and hope for the best, whereas the Europeans are actually confronting their problems in a lot deeper way. And it looks like it's coming to a head, but as I say, one can't sort of just stand, for what I call an impetuous, demand for a solution, which is really not a solution, but kicking the can down the road. Effectively, the problems are political. Effectively, in Europe, it's a crisis of the welfare state. They've effectively promised to their electorates way more than what their tax bases can deliver, and that needs to be solved. And they've to complement that, they've effectively replaced savings with debt over the years, and that's again why you've got that systemic leverage. But that problem is pervasive across the Western world at the moment.
I think I understand what you're saying here, Chris, because if you look again at some of the suggestions that have come through from the French and the Germans are fundamental in a sense, because they want the treaty to enshrine the budget rules in the EU treaty. So they want to deal with that matter at that level. But the issue is that once that is happening, the sovereign debt crisis continues. Should you not be addressing both at the same time?
Well, essentially, why do we have the sovereign debt crisis? The reason is that the common currency has a platform which we call the Maastricht Treaty, where you've got to actually abide by certain rules. Now, all of these countries, including Germany, are breaking the rules. Their debt-to-GDP ratios are above 60%. Their budget deficits are above 3%. I actually don't believe that there would be grounds for crisis if the rules were actually adhered to. And one of the problems was as France and Germany broke the rules in the mid-2000s, and they said, well, we'll manage it over time. And then the peripheral also broke the rules, and that's why I think you've got the crisis.
But again, if you were to say to them, stick to that 3% deficit of the GDP, you are not considering the fact that these are different economies.
Well, the point is that if you are actually sticking to the rules, at least the engagement between these economies are on a level playing field. I think a lot of the other, in terms of economic differences, to my mind, are more a red herring, because it's a case of some of these things expose some of the regulatory idiosyncrasies that prevent proper adjustments taking place in the economy to cope with that harmonized
Do you think it's a red herring, though? Because some people, for instance, are citing Southern Europe. They're saying that those economies are different from Northern Europe, and you've got to accept that, and you've got to deal with them differently.
That may be so, but part of the problem is that you don't have mechanisms that allow the productivities, for instance, to actually level out, with various structural rigidities. And that's the problem. I think it's structural rigidities that are exposing the problems in Europe a lot quicker than they're being exposed in the UK.
Okay, I'm going to bring our other guests in a minute. But again, Chris, the issue that I raised right at the beginning was that, yes, you go your route then, which is go to the fundamental or the heart of the problem, but it takes longer.
It may take longer, but at least you're on a path of solution. When we listen to these politicians talk and say they're about raising taxes, about printing money and that sort of thing, it's about transferring value, destroying value, or whatever. Nothing is about creating value. Now, these are very wealthy, successful. It's a wealthy, successful region of the world. They shouldn't be in this crisis, but effectively they're in the crisis because the weight of the welfare is in fact overwhelming the productive capacity.
Okay. Shawn, do you agree with Chris here?
Well, I think it's very important to focus on the core drivers. And if we just were to take one step further back, there's two key drivers which are affecting the U.S. European economies and beyond. And we're shifting from an industrial era to a digital era, and the economics change vastly for workers and investors. And then something that's even more immediate is the rise of Asia, and that's the rise of greater competitiveness. And then Chris was alluding to how you have, whatever language he might have used, sort of a welfare state, which is excessive in Europe and the U.S., and how that's to be dealt with. And then Chris also touched on destroying value versus creating value. And again, that's very central to how the situation gets resolved. And generally speaking, when things get extremely hectic, that's left to the politicians and the central bankers to do. And to put it a bit crudely, is investors and workers get smacked. And it's very difficult to do when you're dealing with 27 or 17 governments to figure out how you spread the pain. But the pain, just going back to the beginning, my first point, the pain is really coming from Asia is just changing the level of competitiveness. And you're dealing with elements of, you could call it complacency among U.S. workers and maybe even investors and lenders. And the politicians are left to sort that out. And if each country had borrowed in its own currency and traded with its own currency, then the traditional way of dealing with that is you just devalue the currency. And that does the hard work of the politicians. But you don't have that in Europe.
What I've learned, Shawn, is that competitiveness means different things to different people. In your sense, what are you talking about? Are you just talking about, for instance, salaries? Are you talking about exchange rates and so on?
It's all of that, and just to put a little bit of a historical perspective there, competitiveness just didn't used to be that big of an issue prior to globalization. So we have a much different world, and competitiveness is how Asia is catching up. I mean, Asia fell behind starting 250 years ago and fell well behind, and has now gone a long way towards catching up. And the pain of that is really rests with workers primarily in Europe and in the U.S., but also through their pension benefits, which make their companies not competitive, which means the companies take pain as well as investors. And now that needs to be resolved. So the competitiveness is really very broad. And I mean, we could bring it back to South Africa and where South Africa sits in the equation and how it's relevant. Because South Africa is quite distant.